Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we are talking about the 30 missing months of Supernatural. The show ran 15 seasons, but did it? So we'll be talking about that. Let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Carole.
Hi, I'm Carole Stokes on Facebook in the TFWNC group and on Continual. I'm also on Twitter as true_fireside10. I'm a fanfic writer since 2012, and all my fic is on AO3 under fireside10.
Melissa.
I'm Melissa. I hang out in the TFWNC Supernatural group on Facebook, appearing sometimes here on SPN Continual. And my Twitter is Bia_Deans_girl, where I am usually smack talking about the show.
Not about the show, but about some of the people.
True. And posting cute puppy pictures.
That's right. That's right. All the cute puppy pictures. And
I'm Ann Wicker, and I'm a latecomer to the Supernatural fandom, but I went completely down the rabbit hole and have been enjoying being part of the Team Free Will NC group on Facebook and doing these panels on Continual.
And I'm Gail Z. Martin and Morgan Bryce. I write epic and urban fantasy as Gail, and urban fantasy, male paranormal romance as Morgan, but all the modern worlds are ones Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I run the Supernatural TFWNC group, so I'm very grateful to have everybody hanging out with us there. And that's here on Facebook. I'm also a columnist for the Winchester Family Business blog, and I've written a couple of illustrated supernatural fictions recently for them with the wonderful diorama art of Catherine Curl. And there was a Christmas Eve story, and there will be a New Year's Eve story coming up. So, and there have been plenty of other Walker and Supernatural episode recaps and all kinds of stuff. So we are talking about these missing months. You know, Sam goes to hell, Dean goes to Lisa, and there's the summer hiatus, and then bang, it's a year later and season 6 picks up, but instead of a 4-month gap like we had when Dean came back from hell, we have a whole year gone. Same thing is true with the gap between seasons 7 and 8. Dean disappears, goes to purgatory, Sam hits a dog and goes with Amelia. And instead of a summer hiatus, we have another year gone. And then, of course, there is that time with the trickster in Mystery Spot where Sam is hunting down Gabriel. So we see bits and pieces of that time, but we don't get a whole lot of ideas other than what fan fiction serves us up. So let's talk about, and this is mostly headcanon with a little bit of real canon thrown in, and a few of the books, because there is a tie-in book called 1 Year Gone that happens during that time that Sam's in the cage. What do we think happened? What were they really doing during that time? And let's start with the Sam is supposed to be in the cage. He's actually out hunting with Grandpa Samuel. Dean's with Lisa, barbecuing steaks. What else were they doing? Carole, start us off.
Well, I watched some of that today just to refresh myself. And it's very, like when you're seeing the beginning and it's very, suburbia, and here's Dean reaching for the salt, but it's just to salt the eggs. And he's cooking breakfast, and Lisa's bouncing around in her jammies, and here's Ben. And it's all very, very domestic, very apple pie. He's still having some of those little flashbacks, but as we go on, we really find out about how Dean, when he returned to Lisa after losing Sam, he was drinking heavily, having horrible nightmares all the time. He consumed by grief, And even the very first scene we see of him, he's in bed, his eyes are wide open, and you get the feeling he has not slept. So I think he's really got this terrible insomnia, and he just spends the night in bed. I mean, I'm sure he must sleep at some point because he's not insane or dead. But nonetheless, he's just kind of lying there waiting for the alarm to go off for his day to begin, you know. So we have this veneer of Dean. He's working in construction. He's got his buddy there, his next door neighbor, who's his work buddy. They're having the barbecues. They go out for the beers. But it's all a veneer. It's all a facade. And underneath, he is still unresolved about Sam's death. He's like kind of deliberately, I feel, put blinders on to the supernatural because he just cannot deal with anything. You know, he's barely making it from day to day, is my feeling. You know, every day he's like, okay, I got to go out there and be normal for Ben and for Lisa, who by the grace of God have taken me into their home. And it's not until he gets infected by the djinn and it really is breaking through. And then of course he sees Sam and finds out about the whole thing, that Sam's been back for a year, which just rips his heart out, rips it out, hangs it up, and it's bleeding, you know, because he's like, how could you do this without telling me? So it looks happy camper, but it's dark and ugly underneath.
And we see bits and pieces, like there's one pan I remember where he and Lisa are in bed, but you see under the bed there's a jar with water and the
rosary.
The rosary for
Right.
holy water. And then there's the one scene where he's and I got the feeling that it was repeated every night, maybe more than once a night, where he was checking the windows, checking the doors. And, you know, I was surprised it wasn't salt everywhere. I didn't see it, but, you know.
And at one time he even peeks under the rug to make sure the devil trap is still there.
That's right. I forgot about the devil's trap.
So he stopped hunting, but he's not just assuming that everything's hunky-dory.
Exactly.
But I don't think that Lisa believes that he stops hunting. Dean mentions when he's talking to Bobby about how he's found hundreds of books to try and figure out how to get Sam free. He's talking, that scene with Bobby makes me think Dean didn't ever actually stop trying to get Sam out. I can't believe in a world where Dean actually gives up on getting Sam out. So he's doing all this stuff, but it's under the radar. It's on the weekends when Lisa's got Ben off at Little League or soccer or whatever. He's doing it stealth. And then when he's off chasing a lead, I think he says to Lisa, I've got to go hunt this thing. Should only be for the weekend. I'll be back. Because when she comes into the garage, she says to him something about hunting. She's not surprised that there's some hunt that he's looking at in their neighborhood, which leads me to believe that he might not have been hunting every weekend, but he was out looking for clues to hunt down to hunt down Sam, to get Sam free. I don't think it was every weekend. I don't think it was every night, but I think that he was still hiding it, but trying to find ways to get Sam out. I can't believe in a Dean that's just like, I'm hanging on by my fingernails, trying to make this normal life without still trying to find Sam. And that little piece of canon is what sort of really cements that for me.
You know, Supernatural loves its mirrors. And I think it's interesting that in that first episode, I think it's Exile on Main Street in season 6, that it's a djinn that Dean encounters, because I've often wondered how many reflections there were in his life with Lisa of his previous experience with Carmen in the djinn world, where he started to see the breakthrough ghosts of people that they weren't saving in this altered reality. And I wonder how haunted Dean felt by, you know, if he picked up a News of the Weird at the gas station, and he saw that there was a very clear werewolf infestation, and maybe he told Bobby, hey, you got somebody on this? But did it haunt him like those specters he saw in the Jinn world? And I think I think if you put the Jinn world from what is not and should never be, I always get those words wrong, next to Exile on Main Street, I wonder how similar they are and how much he kind of felt the deja vu of that. Like, here we go again. You know, I've read this book. Any thoughts on that? Because the writers are sneaky enough to do that to us.
I hadn't thought of that being a mirrored possibility, but now that you bring it up, I certainly can. And of course, Jinn are, you know, their whole forte is the manipulation of what you see and believe. Because when we first see Dean running into the yellow-eyed demon again and seeing these signs of you know, something supernatural going on, we don't know that he's been poisoned by the Jinn. So we don't know, is he really flipping out? Is it really happening? We don't know what's going on, which is just what happens in what is and what should never be, because, you know, the Jinn are so skilled in that manipulation. So yeah, that's really interesting. I also like Sam swinging a golf club around.
And Dean having to take a knife out of his mom's silverware drawer to be able to go after the Jinn in the first episode.
Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I just, you know, I think about Dean after all of the high adrenaline of all of the rest of his life. And even when they had downtime, they went to Vegas or he was chasing girls at the bar. Putting the brakes on that, how do you undo being an adrenaline junkie? And then the crippling grief on top of that. I agree. I think he had to have been hunting or throwing himself into research or something, because suburbia is by design boring.
And he didn't know how to fit in. He wasn't socialized. A lot of the fanfics talks about how Sam wasn't socialized so that Jessica had to help him at Stanford. But here's Dean, who's had even less normal than Sam, because Dean, we never see Dean with non-hunter friends. At least Sam had Stanford. So he doesn't know all of these weird things that we all know because we learned growing up in some sort of a family and some sort of, we were not feral. So that had to be really stressful, on top of he doesn't have Sam, he's living with Lisa, he's trying to be a father to Ben, or a stepfather, or whatever you want to call it, trying to parent Ben. He doesn't have great role models for himself, for what that looks like, except for how he raised Sammy. And he's missing all of these weird social cues. That's got to be a landmine that he's walking through every day. Maybe not so much at work, because he's used to working odd jobs here and there. So maybe that wasn't an issue, but like home life. And that had to be so stressful on top of everything else. Trying to deal with not appearing to be so strange and odd and feral.
And dangerous. You know, you would not describe most husbands, men who live in the normal tract suburbia as dangerous and predators. But Dean gives off a predator vibe. His whole thing is, I'm an apex predator, watch out.
Yeah.
That's not the soccer dads or the little league dads or the, you know, that's just not Mr. Suburbia. And so, yeah, I can just look at the way the moms at Ben's birthday party reacted to Dean.
I have a slightly different opinion in a way, in that Dean is really good at improvising. He's really good at walking into a situation and scoping it out quickly so that he can blend in a little bit. And
Okay.
I kind of feel like in this situation, he did that and then had to keep running with it, you know, and
So it's like never being able to take off the FBI suit.
exactly.
That's
He
stressful.
made up, he had that persona and he just slipped into it and he just stayed in it, you know, during the day and stuff. And, you know, glad handing at the barbecues and having beers with his buddy and stuff. Because he was really good at that protective coloration, you know, that chameleon-like way to disguise himself, which probably even then fed into like the insomnia because he's denying his true self for so long, but
Right.
that's
Yeah.
what he has to do to get by. And so I kind of feel like he maybe appeared to adapt better than we think,
Okay.
even if he wasn't adapted deep inside. You know, he was able to fake it till you make it, you know, and he just kept faking it.
Anne, how about you?
Well, I'd say I have to agree with Carole. I have to agree with both, but I think Carole is really onto something about that. Dean could go into a situation and assess it really fast. But I do think that he would find faking it for such an extended period of time really stressful, and and that's why he drank a lot. And then with the grief on top of that, I think that it's not explicitly stated, but I think that he was deep down, he was certainly not happy at all. He might have been a little bit content with Lisa and Ben transferring some of what he knew from raising Sammy into trying to help Lisa raise Ben. But he certainly didn't have a role model in his dad. He only had Bobby and himself to go by in helping Lisa raise Ben. But it's also another aspect of that is the sort of found family aspect, that this was something that he never thought he really wanted, but he was able to adapt to it, maybe more smoothly than we thought he did or he thought he would. Even if there were all this undercurrent of stuff going on, it gave him something to think about as far as, do I really want this? And of course, it all went to shit later, but it just, it's interesting that he got more of that than Sam did with Jessica at Stanford.
Absolutely.
And I think a more sincere relationship than Sam did, that Sam later got, than what Sam later got with Amelia, because that's just two totally damaged people.
And I think a big difference there was Lisa knew what they did.
Yeah.
Even if he wasn't really doing it anymore, only once in a while on them, she knew what they did, whereas Jess never knew and Amelia never knew.
Yeah.
So there was a level of honesty that he got to have in his relationship that the others did not. And I also think it's interesting. So for Dean, he's handling this tremendous struggle of doing this facade and, dealing with whatever is he underneath. And when he finally has that showdown with Lisa and he's, bearing his heart about how difficult this has all been. And she's like, you're talking about what the best year of my life, so what he saw was not at all, or what he was living was not what she was living, and there's that dichotomy between what we see and what's really going on.
One of the things I've also always wondered is, just because Dean decided I'm going to go to Lisa. The Winchesters had an awful lot of enemies, and a lot of people had reasons to go after him. And I've always wondered whether or not that was an issue that he was handling on the side, where he'd find out somebody was coming after them and deal with it quietly and without alarming Lisa and Ben. But the other thing I want to bring up here on the stress with Dean is I have a friend who spent 35 years in Canada's version of the Witness Protection Program, because as a child, she witnessed a serial killer. And so she got sent into their version of this for 35 years. I think she had like 19 different names, multiple passports. She had to move every so often. And she's written a book about what that did to her psychologically, and the stress of never being able to be authentically herself with anybody, even the guy she married. One day the FBI Canada's FBI shows up at the door asking for somebody he's never heard of that he happens to be married to. And that didn't go well. And how much stress having to be all those people but never herself was. Of course, the kicker, she finds out that the serial killer's been dead for 5 years and nobody told her. At the end of it, after 30 years. So now she finally got her name back, and she's finally, helping other people live authentically. But that makes me think, what was Dean going through, and how was he lucky enough to be able to stay in one place for a year without the past coming to find him? Any thoughts on that?
I just can only think that he dropped out of everything, and there just weren't any ripples in the pool. He was underwater and nobody knew where he had dropped into. Huh?
He didn't even change his name, did he?
No.
Well, there's a
so.
little wave TV magic. But anybody looking for him may not have been looking for him either under his real name. I don't know. But, if you're talking about monstery things, they're probably not up on internet searches and stuff. And non-monstery things, I don't know, maybe it was just that once he stopped doing anything and there was nothing going out from him, that then the waters just stilled and he was submerged for a while.
Well, we know that working construction is not necessarily an industry known for the most rigorous background checks.
Yeah.
Anne or Melissa, any thoughts on that?
Well, I was just thinking that, Bobby was still around, and Bobby may have had some input on that, because I was just thinking about the parallel with, at some point when Sam decides to quit and he ends up working in a bar under a different name, and the three hunters come into the bar because Sam had called Bobby about, I don't remember, was it a vampire thing or was it a demon thing?
Demon.
Something. And these three hunters come into the bar and they want him to go with them on this hunt. And he says no. And then they come back because one of them's gotten killed and on. And then they try to take the girl that runs the bar hostage or something. So and he had even changed his name, but they did catch up with him, but it was something like, he was feeding information to Bobby. And so I wonder if Dean had really dropped out, except for maybe a few things that he just did on his own without consulting Bobby, that maybe that also protected him in a way. I don't know. I just keeping as much off the radar as he could.
Letting the trail go cold.
Yeah.
Melissa, any thoughts?
I hadn't thought about it until you said it. And now my brain is broken because I agree with what everybody else said. But the flip side on that is he was looking for Sam. He was hunting books. That's canon. That he says that to Bobby. I spent a year, hundreds of books, blah, blah, blah. So he was in it at least as much to dig out these sources, which means he had to have some supernatural connection because he wasn't getting these from Bobby. Because it's just the way he had that conversation. It didn't sound like Bobby was feeding him these books. It sounds like Dean was out doing this research. So if he's researching this stuff, he's at least on the radar to the folks who are like Bobby, who are sources of knowledge. And while Bobby could be trusted not to give away Dean's location, these other folks, I mean, the Winchesters were not really well liked. And so now that you said it, I'm trying to figure out, well, how did he stay under the radar for an entire year?
Although he could have not used his real name while he's looking for those sources. You know.
Gee, I want to get somebody out of the cage in hell. I wonder who that could be.
It is a rather specific request.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
So one of the other things before we move on to another group is I thought it was very interesting the way Dean dealt with Baby in the garage versus the way we see Sam deal with Baby in the finale in the garage. You know, with Dean, she had a tarp over her. She was perfectly preserved. We didn't at least see him going out and sitting in the car to feel close to Sam. And Ben goes out there and tries to touch the car, touches the Lego man, touches the Legos or the army man. Dean bites his head off. And yes, he's got weapons of mass destruction in the back in the trunk, but that's not why he's upset about it. Any thoughts about that parallel with I'm just going to cover Baby because I can't deal with it versus I'm going to go sit in Baby because I really miss my brother? Any thoughts?
I think you just nailed it right there where,
yeah.
you know, in Dean's case, he was like, I have put all this behind me. I'm not doing this. And therefore, you know, Baby's tarped and sealed off and he doesn't even want to like look at her because he's not dealing with that life. Whereas for Sam, this was his a remaining link.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a link
with Dean. Yeah, exactly. And that's why for him, it was a tactile, you know, memory of his time with Dean.
Of course, it also says something to the finality because Sam accepted, Sam accepted that Dean was dead, but he was obviously looking forward to being with him again. And not being able to deal with Baby suggests that Dean did not accept that finality because he wasn't dealing with Baby.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Anne, any thoughts?
I have to agree. I mean, I just think it was two different situations, and obviously Dean didn't want to go join Sam in the cage, you know, and he wanted Sam back with him and Baby, and you know, Sam just was waiting, except for dealing with raising Dean Jr., was pretty much just waiting to join Dean.
Mm-hmm. Melissa, you look like you're going to say something.
Because Anne said something. Dean didn't want to go join Sam in the cage. I wonder, though, if during that year, if Dean had found a way to get into the cage without letting Lucifer out, like not, would he have done it? I think he would have. I think part of the grief was, you know, with Sam, he knew he was going to be reunited with Dean when he died. Versus Dean, even if he died and went to hell, Sam is in the cage. He's not able to join him. So I think, you know, if Dean could have found a way during that year to get into the cage, He'd be in the cage, and Sam would be out doing soulless Sam things, and that would have been awful.
Yeah.
Or they
Well,
would have been in a cage together, and he would have at least been able to try and buffer his torment at Lucifer's hands and stuff.
Well, and I think of what Bobby told them about, the bullet that he carried in his shirt and how he thought about it every day, and he decided that it would not be today. And I think that had to have been something with Sam, in that Sam knew that the option was always there to join Dean sooner rather than later, whether he let a monster do it for him or whatever. Where for Dean, unless he could find a way into the cage, just dying wasn't going to do it. And that's a very different, that gives Sam a little bit of control to say, I can make it another 24 hours and then we'll see. There's that element of, and if I can't take it, well, I've got plan B. Dean didn't have a plan B.
And Sam had Dean Jr., who was, certainly, I'm sure, a ray of light in his life. So.
Now let's back up and look at that 6 months that didn't happen with Sam chasing the trickster. We get glimmers. We heard Sam and Bobby talking about some hunts that he went on, some side hunts while he was chasing Gabriel. But we don't get a whole lot. Anybody else have headcanon about what happened in that 6 months besides what we got to see?
Well, I think that I just rewatched that today, and I think that, Sam's obsession with the trickster was a way of channeling the grief over that. I mean, on top of the however many times he watched Dean die during the whole the first part of it, and these side hunts that we hear he and Bobby talking about, or that we hear these messages from Bobby. But I was struck today for the very first time, was that really Bobby, or was that the trickster leaving him those messages? Because then the Bobby has him meet him back at the mystery spot, and he's, we discover it wasn't really Bobby then. So I was wondering, that made me think, well, Sam's doing these side hunts. Well, as long as I'm in town and there's vampires, I'll kill them. And it's almost just like, it's almost like soulless Sam again, where he's just out there doing that. And I thought a big sort of plot hole in that too was, we don't see if he buried Dean, or, we know what happened with Dean. I know that in that one instance when Dean was in purgatory, or was it when Dean went to hell? I forget.
Hell.
They didn't bury him. Sam wouldn't let Bobby do a hunter's funeral either. I mean, they buried him instead of doing a hunter's funeral. So, I think that it was a way for Sam to channel the grief at that point. And when we find out it was all the trickster, did the trickster set up the vampires in whatever city Sam was in? I mean, was any of that even really real? It didn't seem like it in the end.
Yeah, for all we know, he had Dean under a stasis spell in the trunk of the Impala. But the other thing that always struck me about those messages from Bobby is they really sounded like suicide by monster, because Bobby was saying, took out a nest of vampires by yourself. Damn, boy, that's something else. They sounded increasingly desperate and suicidal, not the assaulted and burned a ghost, way to go. They were hardcore.
Oh yeah.
I think the analogy with soulless Sam is really spot on. He's so coldly focused I mean, we just see him. He does not have an emotion on his face. He is like, here, I will pull the bullet out of myself and then I will sew myself up. You know, he is like nothing. And then of course he's eating his healthy chicken and veggie dinner with his dead brother burger there. You know,
Yeah.
Heartbreak.
it is. But that's the only hint of any emotion that we see. And we don't even see him react to it. We just see it there.
Mhm.
So we know why it's there. But, you know, he is cool and focused and he barks. And, you know, he apparently never calls Bobby back on any of those messages. You know, he is just, his bed is made like an army bed, and all of his stuff, you know, there's none of this random, ooh, red yarn going all over the place. It's like, here are his facts. You know, he's like a machine, which is really a lot like Soulless Sam. So
But I was also
yeah.
I just flashed on that what you were saying just now, Carole, about all the papers, you know, on the walls, and they're all organized and everything. But it also, and one of your favorite things, Gail, it's a mirror back to John's obsessions and how in the old days before computers, John and other hunters would put all the stuff up on the walls like that, the maps, the photos, the newspaper articles, all that stuff. And so that's reminiscent of that and that, you know, John Winchester's obsession, his son's obsession.
Thank you, Anne, for leading into exactly the point I wanted to make. This 6 months, Sam was on a rampage, and he made John searching for the yellow-eyed demon look like a Boy Scout jamboree compared to what he did for trying to find the trickster to figure out what happened with his brother to get his brother back. He was just, you know, John was trolloping along through the tulips compared to what Sam would have been doing to figure out what happened with Dean. And we know how much I love John. No, Sam was the monster that all the monsters feared. I mean, before the monsters were like, oh, you know, the Winchesters, we should be a little worried. No, Sam would have been terror on wheels trying to figure out where the demon was and just venting his rage on anything and everything that came across his path. And that was it. That was his goal, was I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to just raise the field.
Burn it down.
Just my
Which leads us to the very perplexing season 8, I Didn't Look for You. Now, aside from really bad writing, which I think we all know played into this, and we've heard Jared say recently at a convention that while he respected the actress who played Amelia, he really hated that arc. And we have the headcanon that maybe it was never meant to be an actual relationship, that it was started out as a hallucination and the writers changed direction. How do we mesh this with Terminator Sam versus hit a dog, met a girl, fixed air conditioners, didn't even try, when we'd had a season and a half talking about purgatory? You know, you'd think you'd look there. Just like you lose your keys, you say, I don't think they're in the freezer, but maybe I'll look anyhow. And one time out of 100, they're in the freezer. You know, maybe Dean's in purgatory. He wouldn't be, but let's look anyhow. How do we reconcile this?
When he hit the dog, he crashed his head onto the steering wheel, and he had a terrible concussion. And we didn't see it. So the next thing he knew, he was at this motel trying to fix stuff.
The writers had a car accident and got a concussion. That's what happened.
I think you might have a point there.
Yeah, I think that it just really, yeah, it's one of those things like, what were they thinking? And the answer is they weren't. And they were trying, it was like they were trying to take Sam in a different direction that really wasn't Sam. And it just, and I mean, that's a gigantic plot hole that they had been talking about purgatory, and that monsters and, you know, vampires, demons, well, I don't know, demons go to the empty.
Leviathans.
Certainly the
But Leviathans
Leviathan.
would go to purgatory, you know, and with all the other weird things that Dean would get sucked into purgatory with Dick Roman. I mean, it just seems obvious. And then, you know, I don't know. And there was no chemistry between Sam and, I mean, and they were trying to portray Sam as being really damaged. Well, yeah, but he's always, you know, worked through being damaged. He's worked through his grief. And it was like,
unaware of himself.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's terribly out of character for him to have not looked at all. He still would have been guilt-ridden if he'd have looked everywhere and failed. If they wanted to set him up for being implacable to hunt down Demon Dean later on. You know, that's Sammy looking for absolution. They could have done that with him just failing. But it seems so incredibly out of character for him to not even try and just say, you're dead. And Winchester's always stay dead, so it's over.
And to subject himself to really a toxic relationship. I mean, from day one, she was a total bitch to him. Like, what was appealing about that? Did he feel he needed to be punished? Is that why he did this? Who knows? But there was nothing to draw him to her. There was nothing appealing or interesting about her, except that she was horribly abrasive and herself very damaged. But even their damages weren't. Yeah, exactly. It was just a cacophony of horribleness.
And I never got the feeling, you know, she talked a lot about her poor dead husband, Don, but she was really eager to throw him under the bus when Sam came back. There really wasn't I finally got my soulmate back, piss off. It was, well, if we both come back to this room, then, you know, I'll leave him. Which just put another mark in the horrible category for me with Amelia.
Although, you know, looking at Sam without his shirt up on one elbow in that bed.
See ya, Don. See ya.
Yeah.
Well, and it was also, the times I've watched that, it always strikes me that there's one particular scene where they're talking about their losses, and she, you know, so she lost her husband and that she didn't have anybody, and Sam doesn't have anybody, but then her dad turns up, right? You know, and it's like, well, I understand perhaps she didn't have that great a relationship with her dad or something, but they appear, when he comes to visit, they appear to have been fairly close. You know, and he was a military guy. He would understand her having lost her husband in a war or in a military action or whatever they're calling them these days. And so that was kind of like, you know, she had people besides her dead husband or her supposedly dead husband. And Sam really didn't have anybody. So you know, that always struck me as another thing of bad writing, or that somebody wrote one script and somebody wrote the other script without reading the first script, you know.
Yeah.
Spin the writing wheel. Not so used to that.
I know how this happened. Somebody made a bet in the writer's room for a bottle of whiskey, and it was, let's make Sam as unbelievable and out of character as we possibly can, and let's create the most obnoxious woman for him to be with, and we'll get fans to still love this. And there are some fans who actually love Sam and Amelia. None of them are in this room, I don't think. But
No, I don't think I've ever met a Sam and Amelia.
Yeah. And let's figure out a way to have brother drama as soon as Dean comes back, because we can't have them like each other for the first half of any season.
Right. And they can't just be happy to be back together. God forbid. They should just, yeah.
And do we ever find out what Sam does for a living? I mean, Amelia's a vet, but what does Sam do? Is he still
He was working at the motel and like
he works at the motel.
He's a handyman.
Changes that after they're together?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just an odd pairing right there.
Although who knows, because then they move into a house. He and Amelia rent a house or whatever. And
oh, that's right.
So who knows what he's doing at that point? They never even bothered to like fill that in. Maybe he's her boy toy. I don't know.
She's a vet. She could probably afford it, but still.
Yeah, but it's just because you can't picture Sam just like not doing something.
Yeah.
No,
he never just in that blank.
Bake cookies, huh?
Yeah.
So is there any more headcanon to be had here? I mean, fanfic has made mincemeat of the Sam and Amelia thing, and many of them, I think, have a lot more insight and canon compliance than actual season 8. But any other thoughts about what else Sam was doing besides fixing air conditioners in that year that Dean was gone?
I don't think I've even read a lot of fanfic in that era. I would have to go look. But I think the whole Amelia thing is so distasteful that people just don't even go there.
It was the reverse gin. So instead of getting a good dream, he got a bad dream.
Certainly, because certainly there are fics, when Sam's in hell and like maybe Dean starts with Lisa, but he leaves or whatever. And then a mystery response of it. There's just, I'll have to look. Now I'm not sure, but
fair number of
it would be one of those fertile fields because you could write anything, because there's so little there in canon to go on.
Yeah.
I've read a fair number of them, and usually it comes down to a crux of Sam saying to Dean when they come back together again, you just assumed, you asked me what I did, and then you jumped to a conclusion, and you never let me say, so I didn't. But I looked for you. I went through all these things. Usually it's a very hard year on Sam because he's been tortured by demons and taken by hunters, and he's had all these other things happen to him, and he's basically suicidal. And, you're just lucky Amelia was here, because otherwise I hit riot when I was trying to drive the Impala off a cliff.
Yes, I've definitely read that kind of thing. I was driving into a tree or something. And
and that's usually the gist is you jump to a conclusion. If you were going to believe that of me, I'm not going to argue it with you, but that isn't really at all what happened. Let me tell you what I actually did.
The ultimate fix-it, fanfic, the fix-it fic.
Yes, which I like generally much better, although it's harder on Sam.
Well, I don't know. Is anything really harder than living with her?
Well, folks, once again, we've blown through our hour. So thank you so much for coming out to play tonight and thinking about what if and some headcanon and analyzing these things. But before we go, let's let everybody say where people can find you online. And let's go in reverse this time, starting with you, Ann.
You can find me on Facebook under Ann Wicker and on Twitter under Ann Wicker. I'm also on Instagram. Just search Ann Wicker. It's Ann.Wicker2, I think. And also you can always find me in Team Free Will NC.
All right, Melissa.
You can find me in the Supernatural TFW NC group, and the art that I was displaying earlier today is by Cameodocs. So you can find her on Twitter if you liked her stuff. She does a lot of really cool supernatural art.
And commissions. Carole.
I'm here on Facebook in the TFWNC group and on Continual. I'm on Twitter as true_firesign10, And all of my supernatural fanfic is on AO3 under Firesign 10. Mind the tax.
I'm pretty findable at gailmartin.com and morganbryce.com. I run the Natural TFWNC group, and we'd love to have you join us there. That's on Facebook. I'm all my social media is a variation of those names, and I'm under my Gail Z. Martin name on the Winchester Family Business. But most of the time, I'm here on Continual. So thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for being with us tonight, and thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up soon here on Continual, so we'll see you online.